I left the city after midnight because traffic thins and the heat loosens its grip. August still pressed down, even after 3. The dashboard clock glowed pale green. The highway ran straight, then straighter, then stretched until it felt like a ruler laid across sand. I drove alone because that was the point. Driving at night was the one place where my head stopped fighting itself. My dad and I used to do this together. He loved AM radio, loved the patience it required, loved the way a signal could survive distance and time. He died that spring. I kept driving because it felt like a habit that still worked. The desert was quiet in a specific way. Not empty, just wide. The land rolled low and dry, broken by scrub, wire fence, and the occasional service road that went nowhere. The moon sat low and sharp. Headlights caught dust and insects. The road hummed under the tires. My car had no modern screen, just buttons worn smooth. I turned the tuning knob because it gave my hand something to do. I was chasing a station I remembered from childhood, a late-night AM signal that played old country and call-in shows. It used to fade in and out, like it was swimming toward us from somewhere far. Between stations there was static, thick and uneven. AM static carries texture. It sounds like weather. I rolled the knob slow. I passed a preacher talking about debt. I passed farm reports. I passed a ballgame replay. I overshot, then backed off. The static opened and closed. Inside it, I heard a voice. At first it sounded like a recording meant for truckers, clipped and plain. It listed a mile marker number. I checked the roadside post. I had passed that number a few minutes earlier. I assumed it was coincidence or delay. AM does that. Signals bounce. Time slips. I kept my speed steady. The voice came again when I drifted back into the dead space between stations. Another marker number, also behind me. The delivery never changed. No emotion. No pause beyond the rhythm of the static. I looked at the mirrors. Nothing followed. The road behind was dark, a clean tunnel cut by red tail lights fading into black. I told myself it was a highway advisory service bleeding through. Some states run loops with recorded updates for truckers. I had heard them before. They sometimes carry old information. The desert keeps old things longer. I stayed between stations. The static thinned. The voice returned and named a faded billboard. I had just passed a sun-bleached sign advertising a motel that no longer stood. I noticed it because the metal frame looked like bones. The timing was close enough to raise the hair on my arms. I kept driving. The next item was a dead coyote. There was one on the shoulder a mile back, stiff and flattened, formatted with dust. I had seen it in the edge of the headlights and looked away. I did not slow. The voice listed an overturned fence. There was a section of wire leaning into the sand near a cattle gate. I had registered it without thinking. I did not turn the radio off because the sound filled the car. Silence would have left too much room. I told myself that the brain fills gaps when it wants meaning. Grief sharpens attention. Driving at that hour stretches time. The static gave shape to the dark. The road stayed straight. My speed stayed legal. I passed a rest area sign with the lights out. I did not stop. The voice returned one more time. It instructed me to pull over and said the headlights would not help where I was going. The tone stayed calm. The words sat inside the static like they belonged there. I did not pull over. I did not accelerate. I kept my lane and watched the white line flow under the bumper. I focused on breathing and posture and the feel of the wheel. I waited for the next item, the next coincidence that would break the pattern or deepen it. Nothing came. The static continued. The voice stopped. I drove another 40 miles because turning the radio off felt like an admission that I had imagined the rest. The desert did not change. Gas stations appeared at wide intervals, bright islands with buzzing lights. I did not stop at the first one. I did stop at the second because my hands needed to do something real. The clerk barely looked up. I bought water and used the restroom. The mirror showed a tired face with eyes that needed sleep. I washed them and stood there until the buzz in my ears faded. Back in the car, the radio still hissed. I turned the knob and found a strong station. Music filled the cabin. It grounded me. At dawn I reached a town with a name I had never learned. I parked near a diner and waited for the sun to climb. I needed an explanation that did not rely on fear. After breakfast, I asked the waitress about highway radio services. She shrugged and pointed me to the highway department office a few blocks away. The office opened late. A man in a faded polo listened while I explained the static and the voice without drama. He nodded because none of it surprised him. He told me that old AM loops still exist in the region. some run by contractors decades ago. Many were never fully decommissioned. Some carried maintenance notes recorded by a single operator, meant to sync with mile markers for crews. Others were training tapes. The signals drift. At night, AM travels far and folds back on itself. A car radio scanning between stations can catch fragments from multiple sources and stitch them together. He added that the human brain is excellent at matching words to recent images, especially when tired. He said drivers often report hearing warnings that match the road behind them. He said the phrase about headlights was common language from a safety tape used in the 90s, meant to warn crews about washouts and unlit hazards. It stuck because it was written to be remembered. He showed me a box of cassettes pulled from a closet, labeled by hand. One contained a list of mile markers and landmarks, some long gone. The cadence matched what I heard. He played a few seconds. The voice was the same. I left with relief that felt heavy. The night had been real. The fear had been real. The cause was ordinary. I drove back the next evening with the radio off. The desert looked the same. The road hummed. The habit lost its edge. I still think about my dad when the sun goes down. I just do it without chasing voices in the static. I drove because sleep would not come. The hearing ended that afternoon, clean and final, a stack of paper and a judge's voice closing a door I had lived behind for years. The house felt hollow. Every sound lingered. I left with a full tank and no plan, pointed north because the night looked calmer that way. Highway lights thinned fast. The radio faded to static and I shut it off. The road noise steadied my breathing. I turned onto a logging road because it looked maintained and wide, pale gravel pressed flat by recent tires. The entrance had no gate and no sign that said no. Pines stood back from the shoulder like they had been trimmed. I expected a loop. I expected to rejoin pavement. The GPS lost signal within seconds. The screen went blank and then showed a gray grid with no name. I put the phone face down and kept going. The gravel held the beam of my headlights in a soft cone that felt safe. The road climbed and bent. Cut banks rose on one side, a dark wall of dirt and roots. On the other side, trees dropped away into black. 10 minutes in, I noticed the reflectors. They were nailed to trees, not mounted on posts. Some were low, some shoulder high, some higher than my windshield. They were not spaced evenly. A white flash here, a red one there, sometimes too close together, sometimes none for a stretch. They were old and scuffed. A few were cracked. The pattern made no sense for a public road. I told myself they were left over from a harvest, a cheap way to mark a route at night. I did not like that thought. The forest closed in. The road narrowed from wide to passable. Brush leaned toward the gravel, twigs tapping the side panels. I slowed without meaning to. The air felt heavy. My headlights flattened everything into the same color. The reflectors kept appearing, then disappearing as the trees slid past. My lights caught something tall crossing the road ahead. It moved from left to right in one smooth motion, long and fast, with no stumble. It was there and then gone. The shape did not break stride. No eyes reflected. No sound followed. I stopped the car. The engine shut off, and the silence fell hard. No wind moved the branches. No insects sang. Heat ticked from the hood in small metallic clicks. The beam cut the road in half and died in the trees. I felt like the road had paused with me, waiting. The place felt wrong to stop in, like stopping broke a rule. I reached for the ignition and turned it. The engine cranked and caught. The sound felt too loud. I looked ahead again. Nothing stood there. The gravel showed no tracks crossing, no scuff, no mark. I told myself it was an elk. The speed fit. The height fit. The smoothness fit if it was running downhill across the grade. That answer did not settle my chest. I tried to turn around. I eased forward to find a wider spot. The road behind me looked different. The shoulders pressed closer. The cut bank seemed higher. The trees on the drop side leaned in. I rolled a few feet backward to line up for a three-point turn and felt my tires crunch into loose rock. The reflectors behind me looked closer together, crowded like a corridor. I stopped again and forced myself to breathe slow. This was stress, lack of sleep, the aftertaste of court. I backed up a little more. The rear camera showed branches near the bumper that had not been there when I came in. I pulled forward again and turned the wheel hard. The nose swung, then stopped short when the front tire met a shallow ditch hidden by shadow. The gravel slid. I straightened and tried again. The car scraped brush. I backed out, heart thudding. I kept driving forward because forward was easier. The road bent left and climbed. The reflectors continued, random and wrong. Some red ones sat low, near knee height. Red meant danger. Red meant stop. Here they meant nothing. The forest smelled of wet bark and oil-soaked dirt. The beam caught ruts crossing the road at angles, deep grooves pressed by heavy equipment. This was not a loop. This was a working road. The surface changed from packed gravel to loose stone and mud. The tires hissed. The road narrowed again until the mirrors skimmed leaves. I saw cut branches stacked off the side, old slash piles matted down by time. I passed a rusted drum tipped on its side, stained dark. The reflectors clustered near it, 3 white, 1 red nailed crooked. My stomach tightened. The road dipped into a low area. Water filled the ruts. My lights reflected back at me, blinding. I crept through, feeling for traction. On the far side, the road rose sharply and leveled into a small clearing. Tracks cut the dirt in overlapping lines. A pickup had turned here. Another had backed in. A trailer mark curved toward the trees. At the edge of the clearing stood a temporary gate pushed aside. 2 posts sunk shallow, chain coiled on the ground. A hand-painted board lay face down in the weeds. I did not get out to flip it. The reflectors were thick here, nailed to the trunks in a rough circle. Some faced inward. Some faced the road. This was a staging area. This was private. The tall shape came back to me. Smooth. Fast. No sound. It could have been a man running with purpose, crossing from cover to cover. It could have been someone who knew I was there before I knew they were near. I felt small in my car, a bright box in the dark. I turned the car around in the clearing with careful movements. The wheels spun once and caught. I faced back the way I came. The road looked tighter now because my lights showed the walls. I drove slow, keeping the tires centered. Every reflector seemed closer. The red ones flashed like warnings meant for someone else. Halfway back, my headlights found a length of wire stretched low across the road, slack and thin, tied to trees on both sides. It sagged in the middle, just high enough to catch a bumper, just low enough to miss the beam until the last second. I stopped with inches to spare. The wire glinted dull. It was not old. The knots were fresh. I sat there and let the truth settle. This was not a public route. The reflectors were not guidance. They were markers for people who worked here at night. The wire was a barrier meant to stop vehicles, or to test who belonged. The tall figure was not a thing from the woods. It was a person moving fast and quiet across a road they controlled. I did not get out. I backed up until I had space and eased around the wire, angling onto the shoulder where the brush was thinner. Branches scraped paint. Thorns ticked the glass. The car lurched and then cleared. I kept going, eyes fixed ahead, hands steady. The road widened near the entrance. The reflectors thinned and then vanished. Pavement appeared like a promise. I rolled onto the highway and drove for miles before I pulled over. My hands shook when I shut off the engine. Later, in daylight, I learned about illegal night logging and poaching rings that mark routes with tree-nailed reflectors, red for hazards, white for turns, patterns known only to them. I learned about trip wires set to deter curious drivers. I learned that elk move loud when they cross gravel. What I saw moved quiet, because it knew where to step. I did not go back. I sold the car months later, the scratches still faint along the sides. The divorce closed. Sleep returned in pieces. The map never showed that road because it was not meant to be found. I was driving a county back road in Arkansas because it shaved 40 minutes off the trip and there was no traffic after dark. June heat still sat on the pavement even close to midnight. The windows were down because the air conditioner in my truck cut out earlier that week. The smell of pine, warm dirt, and stagnant water drifted in from the ditches. The road had no lines left in places, just a ribbon of cracked asphalt stitched through trees and low pasture. My headlights tunneled forward and swallowed everything else. I had been alone for hours. The radio faded in and out, and I shut it off because the static made my shoulders tight. The night felt heavy, not threatening, just dense, like it pressed down on the hood and the roof. Insects hit the windshield in soft thuds. I kept my speed steady because deer crossed that road often. I knew that stretch. I had driven it enough to trust it more than I should have. The shape appeared too late to stop. It lay across the road at a diagonal, pale and bulky, for catching the light. My foot went hard on the brake, and the truck fishtailed a little before I yanked the wheel. I missed it by inches. As I passed, my brain labeled it a dead deer and moved on, already replaying the swerve, already calming down. Then I looked in the mirror. It did not stand. It did not rise. It shifted. Limbs slid over each other with slow intent, like a body trying to remember where joints belonged. The mask tightened and loosened, then tightened again. Something dragged itself toward the shoulder using elbows. A head lifted for a second, wrong-shaped because it was pressed flat by the road. The eyes caught my headlights and went dull again. I pressed the gas until the engine whined. My hands shook against the wheel. I kept my eyes forward, but the mirror pulled at me. I checked it again and saw the shape roll, then stop moving. The distance grew. Trees swallowed the road behind me. The smell hit next. It came through the open windows and filled the cab. Hot copper and wet fur, thick and sweet, like blood baked on metal. I gagged and rolled the windows up, but the smell stayed, clinging to my clothes and the seats. It did not fade with speed. It rode with me. 10 miles later, my chest still felt tight. The road climbed and dipped. The forest thinned into fields, then closed again. I did not slow. Every time my headlights swept a ditch, my stomach jumped. I kept expecting to see movement on the shoulder, a figure lurching after me, but the road stayed empty. I turned onto the gravel lane that led to my family's old hunting cabin. The place sat back from the road, no neighbors close enough to matter. I had planned to sleep there before heading out early. The gravel popped under the tires. Dust rose and hung in the beams. I pulled up close to the porch and killed the engine. The silence pressed in fast. The smell was worse outside. It rolled out of the cab when I opened the door and settled around me. I stood there listening, every sense stretched thin. Crickets rasped. Something moved in the brush and stopped. I locked the truck and carried my bag inside without looking back. Sleep did not come. Every small sound snapped me awake. The smell followed me into the cabin, faint but present, like it had soaked into my skin. I checked the locks twice. I lay there with my eyes open until the dark thinned and birds started up. Morning light made the place feel normal again. Heat rose early. I told myself the night had bent my thoughts. I had seen a dead deer twitch, nothing more. Nerves did the rest. I drank water, ate a protein bar, and walked back out to the truck. The smell hit me again, stronger in daylight. I circled the truck and found streaks along the passenger side, dried dark smears that cut through the dust. They ran from the rear quarter panel toward the cab, uneven and low, like someone had leaned and slid. The door handle had a print on it, not clear enough to see lines, just the shape of fingers pressed and dragged. My pulse climbed. I crouched and checked under the truck. Nothing. I opened the hood. Nothing there either. Flies gathered around the back bumper. I went to the tailgate and hesitated before opening it. When I did, the dust told the story in a way my mind could not soften. Handprints pressed into the fine layer, palms smeared, fingers long and splayed. They dragged forward toward the cab. The pattern stopped short of the rear window, as if whatever made them had slid off or been shaken loose when I sped up. There were no animal prints mixed in. No hooves. No claws. Just hands. I drove straight to town and did not stop. At a gas station, I washed the truck with a hose until the water ran clear. The smell clung anyway. I reported what I saw to the sheriff without embellishment. They took notes and asked about the exact location. They said others had hit deer along that road, and that sometimes injured animals moved after impact. They did not explain the hands. 2 days later they called me back. They had found a man in the woods near that stretch, dead from blood loss and shock. He was a local known for poaching and for sleeping rough when he needed to hide. He had been hit by a car earlier that night, not mine, and dragged himself off the road. A deer carcass lay nearby, freshly cut. He had been working it when another vehicle clipped him and the body tangled. The weight and angle crushed him. He crawled onto the road trying to flag help. Another car swerved and missed. That was me. The smell made sense then. Blood heated by pavement. Wet fur from the deer he had opened. The movement in the mirror fit a human body fighting pain, trying to orient under shock. The hands on my truck fit a last decision made by a man who could not stand and needed warmth, who grabbed at the nearest moving thing and lost his grip. The explanation did not ease the images. It sharpened them. I replayed the mirror again and again, the way the limbs slid, the brief lift of the head. I thought about how close I came to stopping, about what I would have seen if I had. I thought about the smell riding with me for miles and how it felt like it wanted to stay. I do not take that road anymore. When I drive at night and see something pale ahead, my foot finds the brake before my mind does. I keep the windows up even in summer. Sometimes when the air turns coppery for no reason, I feel my hands tighten on the wheel, and I know exactly why. I left the hospital just before midnight, my head still tight from fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant. My brother was alive, which felt like the only solid fact left in the world. Everything else was blurred by sleep loss and the long stretch of road waiting for me. The interstate was almost empty. Snow had started falling while I was inside, light and steady, the kind that softens sound and makes distance feel shorter than it is. I settled into the drive with the radio off. The tires made a low hiss on the pavement. The heater struggled, blowing warm air that never quite reached my hands. I kept replaying the image of my brother in a hospital bed, tubes taped to his skin, eyes closed. I had promised myself I would get home without stopping. I wanted my own bed. I wanted darkness without beeping machines. The interstate cut through flat land, fields buried under snow, fence posts vanishing into white. Overhead signs were spaced far apart. Mile markers stood alone at the shoulder, thin and reflective, flashing past at regular intervals. I watched them without meaning to, letting the numbers tick forward as proof that I was moving. When I passed mile marker 142 the first time, I noticed it only because my hands felt colder all at once. I flexed my fingers around the wheel and leaned closer to the vents. Snow had thickened enough to blur the edges of the road. The sky was low and bright with reflected light, no stars visible. I drove on, expecting the next marker to appear. Minutes later, the same sign slid into view again. Mile marker 142, standing at the right shoulder, tilted slightly toward the road. I felt a small jolt of confusion. I checked the speedometer. I checked the odometer. Everything looked normal. I told myself I had misread it the first time. Fatigue does that. The road can look the same for miles, especially at night in snow. The snow picked up, flakes larger now, striking the windshield hard enough to sound like grit. I turned the wipers up a notch. The car interior seemed dimmer, the dash lights dull. My breath fogged faintly when I exhaled. I adjusted the heat again and rubbed my arms through my jacket. The third time I saw mile marker 142, my stomach tightened. The sign stood in the same place relative to a bent guardrail and a shallow ditch half filled with snow. I knew then that something was wrong. I slowed without realizing it, my foot easing off the accelerator. The road ahead looked narrower, the lines half buried. The snow swallowed the sound of the engine. That was when I saw the man. He stood beneath the sign, close to the post, his boots sunk into the snow. He wore a dark coat that hung unevenly on his frame. One arm was raised in a wave, moving slow and stiff. The elbow bent at an angle that made my skin prickle. It looked wrong in a way I could not explain, like an old injury that never healed. His other arm hung close to his body. I did not stop. I did not speed up. I drove past, eyes locked on the road, aware of him in my peripheral vision. I told myself he was stranded. The storm could do that. Cars slide off the road. People walk for help. The way he waved was strange, but injuries are strange. Cold makes people move oddly. As soon as he disappeared behind me, the car felt colder. The heater blew air that no longer felt warm. My hands ached. The snow came down harder, filling the beam of my headlights until the world narrowed to a white tunnel. I focused on keeping the car straight. My thoughts jumped back to the hospital, to the sound of monitors, to the idea that I should have stayed longer. I expected to see mile marker 143 next. I counted the seconds. I scanned the shoulder. When the sign appeared, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. The vibration startled me so badly I jerked the wheel. The tires slipped for a breathless moment before catching again. I slowed and steadied the car, heart pounding. The screen lit up with a missed call notification. The number listed was mine. I pulled off at the next exit ramp without thinking, coasting onto a strip of asphalt barely visible under snow. I stopped under a flickering light that buzzed and cast a weak yellow circle. The silence pressed in around the car. Snow tapped softly against the windows. I stared at the phone, then unlocked it. The call log showed one missed call, time-stamped just minutes earlier from my own number. No voicemail. No other notifications. I knew enough about phones to know that number spoofing exists, that glitches happen. None of that explained the timing, or the way my chest felt tight as if I had been holding my breath for too long. I sat there until my heartbeat slowed. I told myself I needed to think clearly. Fatigue, stress, weather, all of it lined up to make a bad mix. I remembered seeing an exit sign earlier for a rest area. I pulled back onto the road, moving carefully, watching the markers with forced calm. I reached mile marker 143 without incident. Relief washed through me, sharp and almost painful. The snow eased slightly. The heater began to work again, warm air finally reaching my hands. I drove on, eyes scanning the mirrors, the shoulder, the dark fields beyond. I did not see the man again. I made it home just after 3 in the morning. The driveway was half buried. I sat in the car for a long time before going inside, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Sleep came hard and shallow. When morning light finally filled the room, the night felt distant but not unreal. I needed to understand what happened. That afternoon, after some rest, I drove back out while it was still daylight. The weather had cleared. The road looked ordinary, flat and open. Mile marker 142 stood where it always had. I parked safely off the shoulder and walked a short distance, careful of traffic. The explanation came together slowly, in pieces that fit without comfort. Just before mile marker 142, the interstate curved gently, then split briefly where an old frontage road ran parallel before merging again. At night, in snow, the merge was easy to miss. A driver drifting right could slide onto the frontage road without noticing, then rejoin the interstate just before the same marker. The bent guardrail marked the point where vehicles often clipped the shoulder. Tire tracks cut through the snow showed it still happened. The man made sense too, in a way that left me cold. A local news article later mentioned a hit and run weeks earlier. A pedestrian struck near that same marker, arm shattered at the elbow, left with limited movement. He had survived. He sometimes returned to the area, looking for witnesses, hoping someone would stop. Standing beneath the sign made him visible. Waving slowly conserved strength in the cold. The phone call took longer to explain, but it did. I checked my carrier records. During the drive, my phone had lost signal briefly, then reconnected. In that gap, it had attempted to sync, mislabeling an outgoing call attempt as incoming. A glitch, rare but documented. The timing lined up with the stretch of road where coverage dropped. Nothing supernatural remained when I laid it all out. No loops in time. No impossible calls. No figures that vanished into thin air. There was only exhaustion, weather, an unfamiliar road, and a man injured badly enough to move in ways that looked wrong in the dark. Knowing this did not erase the memory of that night. I still remember the cold that crept into the car, the way the snow thickened each time I passed the sign, the sight of an arm bending at an angle my mind could not accept. I remember the vibration of my phone and the spike of fear that followed. I drive that stretch of interstate differently now. I watch the merges. I keep the heat higher. I pull over when fatigue presses too hard. Mile marker 142 still stands there, unchanged, a thin post on the shoulder. Every time I pass it, I feel my hands tighten on the wheel, and I keep going until the number behind me is 143. We finished the pour after midnight, smoothing the last section under work lights that made the wet concrete look black and deep. My shoulders burned from holding the screed. My hands shook from caffeine and cold. March in rural Pennsylvania still held winter in the ground, and the quarry sat lower than the road, a bowl of dark water and stone that swallowed sound. When we packed up, the night felt heavier than usual, like the air had weight. I drove the company truck. My coworker sat beside me, helmet on his lap, head tipped forward. The cab smelled of dust, diesel, and damp gloves. The access road out of the quarry cut through woods with no houses, no barns, no signs. The trees stood close to the pavement, thin trunks and bare branches that caught the headlights and flashed past like ribs. The road surface changed every few hundred yards, from old asphalt to patched gravel and back again. I kept the speed steady and watched for deer. I remember the clock on the dash reading 2:20. The radio stayed off. The engine noise filled the cab, steady and low. I felt the pull of sleep in my eyes and pushed it away by sitting straighter and rolling the window down an inch. Cold air came in, sharp and clean, smelling of leaves and stone. Halfway through the drive, my coworker stirred. He shifted in the seat and asked why I had slowed down. I checked the speed without thinking. The needle had not moved. My foot held the same pressure on the pedal. I told myself he was waking into a half-dream and ignored it. Then I heard it. At first it sounded like loose gravel popping under the tires, but it stayed too even. The rhythm matched the truck. It came from the left side, just outside the headlight spill. Not behind us. Not ahead. Even with my door. The sound had weight to it, a steady thud that rode along with the engine noise instead of falling away. I glanced left. The ditch fell off sharp there, a narrow shoulder and then darkness. The headlights lit the right side better than the left. The trees swallowed the beam before it reached the ground. I saw nothing moving. I told myself it was the road surface and kept driving. The sound stayed. When I eased the truck faster, it rose with me. When I eased off, it stayed level. The thud stayed locked to the cab like it knew where my door was. My coworker tensed. He did not turn his head. His breathing changed. He pressed back into the seat and kept his eyes forward. He made a small sound, low and steady, like he was trying to keep himself anchored. He did not want me to stop. I focused on the lane lines. My palms sweated inside my gloves. The cold air from the window no longer helped. I tested the brake, just a touch. The thud matched the change without lag. I tested the gas. Same result. The sound did not rush or fade. It stayed exact. I searched for explanations that fit the world I knew. A deer would fall back or surge ahead. A person could not keep pace at that speed on uneven ground. A loose strap would slap in bursts, not in a measured rhythm. A flat tire would change the feel of the wheel. Nothing felt wrong in my hands. The truck tracked straight. The woods closed in tighter. The road dipped and rose. Shadows slid across the hood. The sound kept time. My coworker stayed rigid, refusing to look, his focus fixed on the strip of pavement ahead. The cab felt small, like the space between us had shrunk. I remembered the quarry rules about night patrols and trespassers. The site had a service path that ran parallel to the access road for a stretch, used by security trucks during the day. It sat lower than the road in places, hidden by brush. I had driven it once months earlier. The thought did not calm me. The sound still felt wrong for a vehicle. I slowed again as the road bent left. The thud bent with us, still aligned. The trees thinned for a moment, and moonlight broke through. The left shoulder opened just enough to show pale stone and scrub. In that brief wash of light, something moved. It was not a shape from a story. It was a person. He ran on the narrow strip between brush and ditch, keeping pace with the truck. He wore dark work clothes and a hood pulled tight. No reflective tape. No light. His arms pumped low and close. His stride stayed even, trained, efficient. His head stayed turned toward the road, not the truck. He ran like someone used to matching a vehicle on uneven ground. The thud made sense then. It was his feet on packed stone, a sound carried by the cold air and pinned to the cab by speed. I felt a surge of anger cut through the fear. This was dangerous. One slip, and he would go under the wheels. I eased off the gas more, trying to create space. He matched again, close enough that the sound filled the cab. My coworker pressed his lips together and stared harder at the road. The bend straightened. The moonlight fell away. The runner dropped back, then surged, then dropped again as the shoulder narrowed. The sound wavered for the first time. Brush scraped. A branch snapped. The thud fell behind us and faded. I did not slow. I did not speed. I held the lane until the woods opened into the first sign of town, a lonely reflective marker that caught the headlights and flashed white. The access road met a wider county road. Lights appeared ahead, far and faint. The sound did not return. My coworker exhaled long and deep. His shoulders lowered. He still did not look back. We drove the rest of the way in silence. At the yard, we parked under the sodium lamps. The night felt ordinary again. The smell of concrete dust came back. My hands stopped shaking. We checked the truck. No loose parts. No damage. No signs of impact. The tires looked fine. The explanation came later, clean and plain. The quarry had hired a night watchman after thefts the previous winter. He ran to stay awake and warm, using the service path that paralleled the access road. He wore dark clothes to avoid spooking drivers and animals. He had learned to match speed to check plates without stopping vehicles. He had a radio, but the batteries died often in the cold. He had been warned not to approach moving trucks, but did it anyway, trusting his legs and the ground he knew. A week after that night, I saw him at the gate at dawn, stretching with the same tight economy I had seen in the moonlight. He nodded once, neutral, like the night meant nothing. The sound had not been something following us from the dark. It had been a person doing a job in a place built to swallow light and sound. I still drive that road with the radio off. I still keep the window cracked. When the woods press close and the shoulder falls away, I listen for the rhythm of feet and remember how easy it is for something ordinary to feel wrong at 2:20 in the morning. My name is Alicia, and this happened in coastal Oregon in November of 2019. It was late, around 9:30 at night, and the three of us were driving inland after spending the evening by the ocean. The air still smelled like salt and wet sand, clinging to our jackets and hair. The car was warm from the heater running too high, and the windows were fogged enough that the outside world felt distant, like we were sealed inside a bubble of light and sound. Music filled the car, louder than it should have been, the bass soft but constant, vibrating through the seats. The road was familiar, a narrow two-lane highway that cut through dark stretches of forest and occasional open land. We had driven it dozens of times. The mood was light at first. We were tired but relaxed, that calm feeling that comes after being near the ocean at night. The sky was low and cloudy, no stars, no moon, just a dark ceiling pressing down. The road reflected the headlights in long pale streaks. That was when I noticed the van. It was white, boxy, and older, the kind of minivan that blended into traffic during the day and disappeared completely at night. It pulled out behind us from a side road or turnout. I never saw exactly where it came from. One moment there was nothing behind us, the next there were headlights sitting at a steady distance. Not too close, not far back, just present. At first it meant nothing. Cars follow each other all the time on roads like that. Passing lanes are rare, and people get stuck together for miles. I kept driving the same speed, my hands loose on the steering wheel, eyes moving between the road and the mirrors. The van stayed exactly where it was. The distance never changed. A few minutes passed. The road curved along a hillside, trees tight on both sides. I adjusted the rearview mirror to clear the fog and got a better look. The headlights were dull and slightly uneven, like one bulb was older than the other. The body of the van looked clean but plain. No decals, no roof rack, no visible license plate when the headlights behind us hit the bumper and washed it out in white light. That was the first detail that stuck with me. I told myself the angle was bad or the plate was dirty. I focused forward again. The music kept playing. The heater hummed. The road stayed empty ahead of us. No oncoming traffic. No houses. No streetlights. Just forest and darkness. After another stretch of driving, the van still had not changed position. I checked my speed and slowed slightly, expecting it to pass or close the gap. It slowed too, maintaining the same distance. I sped up again, just a little, and it matched me. That was when the tension started creeping in, quiet and cold. We reached the first turnout, a small gravel pull-off overlooking a dark drop toward the trees. I signaled and pulled in, rolling to a stop. Gravel crunched under the tires. I expected the van to pass without hesitation. It slowed, turned in behind us, and stopped. Its headlights stayed on, filling the inside of the car with white glare. I waited, counting seconds in my head. Nothing happened. No door opened. No engine revved. It just sat there, idling low enough that I could not hear it over our own engine. I pulled back onto the road and drove on. The van followed. My chest felt tight now, like the air in the car had thickened. I checked the mirrors more often. The windows had fogged again, and I wiped a clear patch with my sleeve. The van stayed in that same fixed position, steady as a shadow. The second turnout came up a mile later. I pulled in again, slower this time, watching closely. The van slowed with us, rolled in, and stopped again, lining up directly behind our bumper. The headlights stayed on. Still no movement inside. Still no plate. That was when I felt the first real surge of fear, sharp and physical. My heart started beating harder, fast enough that I could feel it in my throat. This was no longer coincidence. There was no reason for it to stop twice. I pulled back onto the road without waiting. The forest seemed thicker now, the trees closing in, the darkness pressing against the edges of the headlights. The road narrowed as it climbed slightly, curves tighter, shoulders thinner. The van stayed with us, silent and patient. I thought about turning around, about heading back toward the coast, toward lights and people. The idea vanished as soon as it formed. Turning around meant stopping, slowing, giving it an opening. I kept going forward. A Forest Service road came up on the right, one we knew well enough. Gravel, narrow, winding, leading deep into the trees before eventually looping back toward a small residential area miles away. It was not a road anyone unfamiliar with the area would take at night. It made sense as an escape. I turned sharply onto it. The headlights behind us dipped briefly as the van hit the gravel, then leveled out. It followed without hesitation. The sound of tires on gravel filled the car, loud and rough. Dust rose and drifted through the beams of our headlights. The road immediately narrowed, branches close enough that they brushed the sides of the car. I drove faster than I should have, focused on keeping control, avoiding ruts and loose stones. The van stayed behind us, the distance unchanged. I looked back again, trying to see inside. The windows were completely fogged, opaque white with moisture. There was no outline of a driver. No glow from a dashboard. Just a vague darkness behind the glass. The van felt empty and occupied at the same time. Then I noticed movement. It was subtle, barely visible through the fogged rear window. A shift, like weight moving from one side to the other. Not a head, not arms. Something low and heavy, changing position. The van rocked slightly, just enough to notice. The movement happened again a moment later, slower this time. My hands tightened on the steering wheel until my fingers ached. The road twisted deeper into the forest, trees swallowing any sense of direction. The only light came from our headlights and the van behind us. No signal, no houses, no chance of help. The van began to close the distance. Not fast, not aggressive, just a gradual tightening, like a rope being pulled an inch by inch. I accelerated, gravel spraying, engine straining. The van matched me easily. The headlights grew brighter, filling the car with harsh light. The shadows inside our car flattened and disappeared. Another shift inside the van. Heavier this time. The suspension dipped and rose. I realized then that the van did not need to pass us. It was not trying to scare us into pulling over. It was hurting us, keeping us on the road, pushing us forward where it wanted us to go. The forest road ended suddenly at a small clearing with a locked metal gate. Beyond it, darkness and trees. No way through. No room to turn around easily. I slammed the brakes and stopped just short of the gate. The van stopped behind us. The engine noise from it went quiet. The headlights stayed on. The fogged windows glowed white. The shifting inside happened again, closer to the front this time. The passenger side of the van dipped slightly. I sat there, frozen, every muscle locked, breath shallow and fast. I knew with absolute clarity that getting out of the car meant not getting back in. Staying still felt just as dangerous. I did the only thing left. I threw the car into reverse and floored it. Gravel flew. The engine screamed. The car lurched backward, tires slipping before catching. The van stayed still for a split second, then its headlights flared brighter as it shifted into gear. I did not wait to see more. I swung the wheel hard, using the clearing to turn around in a wide, uneven arc, barely missing trees. The van surged forward, but too late to block us. I straightened out and sped back down the forest road, faster than before, barely controlled. The van followed for a short distance, then slowed. I watched in the mirror as its headlights grew smaller. It did not chase us back to the highway. It stopped somewhere in the darkness, turning off its lights entirely. One moment it was there. The next it was gone. We reached the highway and did not stop driving until we were surrounded by lights and open businesses. We sat in the car for a long time before getting out, shaking, silent, replaying every detail. The next day in daylight, we drove back to the forest road entrance. There were deep tire marks in the gravel, fresh and wide, leading to the clearing and stopping near the gate. There were no marks leading away. We reported it. Nothing came of it. No matching vehicles. No similar calls. I still think about the way it waited behind us, patient and quiet, never rushing, never signaling. I think about the fogged windows and the weight shifting inside. Whatever was in that van did not want attention. It wanted time. I left Amarillo later than planned because I kept telling myself I could make a few more miles. Hotels along the interstate all looked the same, and I did not want to spend the money. July nights in the Texas Panhandle felt endless, warm even after midnight, the air still holding the heat from the day. The highway west of town ran straight and flat, a ribbon of pale concrete under my headlights. No curves, no hills, just fence lines, dark fields, and the occasional distant red light from a tower. I drove alone with the radio off to stay alert. The car was older but reliable, the kind of sedan that hummed more than it roared. The dash lights glowed a soft green. I checked the clock often because fatigue makes time feel slippery. At 11:58 p.m., I remember thinking that midnight would be a small milestone, something to mark progress. I rolled my shoulders and adjusted my grip on the wheel. The air conditioner was on low, enough to keep me from sweating without making me cold. The land felt empty in a way that was calming at first. No towns, no exits worth taking. The road signs slid past at regular intervals. I used my turn signal to pass a slow truck, the clicking sound steady and familiar. After I moved back into my lane, I let the blinker shut off and watched the road settle back into its quiet rhythm. The clock changed to 12:01 a.m. while I was alone on a long straight stretch. Almost immediately, I heard 3 taps on the passenger side window. Slow, deliberate, not loud, but clear enough that my foot lifted off the gas without me thinking about it. My first thought was a bug. Big moths hit cars all the time at night, especially out here. I kept my eyes forward and waited for another sound. The tapping came again, 3 taps, spaced evenly, right where the glass met the door frame. I glanced to my right. The window was dark, reflecting the dashboard lights and the faint blur of the road behind me. Nothing outside. No cars. No headlights. Just black land and a pale shoulder line sliding past. As I looked, the glass began to fog from the inside. The humidity was higher than I realized, and the cool air from the vents met the warm night air trapped in the car. Condensation bloomed across the passenger window in a thin, cloudy film. Within that film, shapes appeared. Not smudges or streaks, but clear outlines where moisture did not collect. 5 long marks spread apart, then a second set beside them. Handprints, as if someone pressed their palms against the inside of the glass. My chest tightened. The car had been locked since I left Amarillo. I had not stopped for gas or food for hours. The back seat was empty when I left. I had checked, out of habit, before getting in. I stared at the window too long and drifted slightly toward the shoulder. I corrected the wheel and forced myself to breathe slowly. The hand shapes stayed there, sharp against the fog, positioned at about chest height for a seated person. Another set of taps landed on the glass. 3 again. This time I noticed the timing. The taps matched the faint clicking sound of my turn signal relay, which I had not realized was still on. I had nudged the stalk without meaning to when I corrected the wheel. Click, tap. Click, tap. The sounds overlapped until my brain linked them together. I turned the blinker off. The clicking stopped. The tapping stopped at the same time. My hands shook on the wheel. I told myself to think clearly. Panic would not help. I turned the air conditioner up slightly. The fog on the window thickened, then began to thin near the edges. The hand shapes stayed clear, like negative space cut into the mist. I shifted my eyes to the side mirror, then the rearview mirror. The back seat looked empty. No movement. No shadows that did not belong. The headrests sat where they always did. A jacket lay folded on the seat, undisturbed. I reached over with my right hand, keeping my left steady on the wheel, and wiped the passenger window with the edge of my sleeve. The fog smeared, and the hand shapes disappeared into a broad, dull streak. The glass felt cool and slightly damp. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The road stretched ahead, unchanged. My heart beat hard enough that I felt it in my neck. Then the tapping started again. 3 taps. Same spot. Same spacing. The turn signal was still off. I flicked the blinker on deliberately. Click. Tap. Click. Tap. The timing matched again, too perfect to ignore. When I turned it off, both sounds stopped together. The connection did not make me feel better. It made the situation feel mechanical and wrong, like a problem hiding inside the car rather than outside it. I eased my speed down and watched the passenger window closely. Condensation crept back, spreading unevenly. This time, the shapes that formed were smaller, partial, like fingertips rather than full palms. They appeared lower on the glass, closer to the door handle. I forced myself to scan the interior again, this time slower. I leaned forward slightly, angling the dome light switch with my eyes, ready to flip it on if I had to. I did not want sudden light yet. I wanted to understand. That was when I noticed the smell. A faint, stale odor, like old fabric and sweat, not strong enough to be obvious at first. It seemed to come from the passenger side footwell. I adjusted my posture and felt a subtle resistance under the dashboard, a pressure that had not been there before. Something was pressed against the underside of the glove compartment. The realization settled in pieces. Someone small could fit there. Someone who knew how to stay still. Someone who could breathe quietly and avoid detection at a quick glance. The condensation made sense then. Warm breath rising from below, trapped against cool glass. The hand shapes were not pressing hard. They were hovering close, blocking the fog from forming rather than smearing it away. The tapping followed the turn signal because the vibration traveled through the door panel. Each click of the relay sent a faint tremor through the frame, enough to make something loose inside the door or window strike the glass in rhythm. I kept driving. Stopping on the shoulder felt dangerous. I focused on the next set of lights ahead. A truck stop I knew was coming up within 10 miles. I did not speed. I did not slow too much. I held the lane steady and breathed through my nose. The tapping did not return once I left the blinker off. The window stayed mostly clear as the air conditioner dried the interior. The smell grew stronger, confirming what I already knew. When the truck stop lights finally filled the windshield, I pulled into the brightest area near the fuel pumps. I shut off the engine and flipped the dome light on in one smooth motion. A man was wedged under the dashboard on the passenger side, knees pulled tight to his chest, face turned away from the light. His clothes were dirty, his shoes worn thin. One hand rested against the inside of the door, fingers spread where the condensation had outlined them minutes earlier. A loose piece of trim inside the door panel hung near the window, positioned so that any vibration made it tap softly against the glass. He did not move when the light came on. He did not try to run. He looked exhausted, more than anything else. I got out of the car immediately and walked toward the building, keeping the vehicle in sight. By the time I returned with help, the passenger door was open and the footwell was empty. Later inspection showed no forced entry. The door lock on that side sometimes failed to engage fully. I remembered stopping briefly at a dark rest area outside Amarillo to stretch my legs, leaving the car unattended for less than 2 minutes. The drive after that was short. I paid for a room and slept with the lights on. The next morning, the passenger window showed faint smudges in the sunlight, marks that only made sense once you knew they were there. I was driving through the Texas Panhandle on a clear July night, alone, trying to make up time and save money on a hotel. The highway stretched flat in every direction, straight as a ruler, with nothing but fields and occasional windmills on either side. The air conditioning hummed in the car, but I had the windows cracked just enough to feel the dry, warm night air. The road was empty, except for the occasional set of headlights in the distance, and the sound of tires on asphalt filled the space between the music I had playing quietly. I was conscious of the clock on the dashboard, waiting for midnight. Something about driving through the dead of night made me aware of every minute passing. I wasn't tired yet, just aware, alert, feeling the quiet weight of the highway around me. I glanced at the clock at 11:59, noticed the numbers click over to 12 o'clock, and kept my eyes on the road. The dashboard lights reflected faintly on the windshield, making the highway look even emptier than it already was. Then, just after 12:01, I heard it, 3 taps on the passenger side window. Slow, deliberate. I flinched and blinked. The sound was sharp in the silence of the car, startling because it was sudden but quiet enough that it might have been imagined. I slowed slightly, thinking a branch had tapped against the car, or maybe a bird or some stray animal had landed for a moment. I shook my head and glanced over at the window. That's when I saw the handprints. They were faint at first, emerging in the condensation on the inside of the glass, like someone had been pressing their hands flat against it. I froze, my stomach tightening. My breath had been warm, and yet the handprints weren't mine. They formed slowly, as if the glass had been held by someone sitting right next to me, leaning in close. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself to think rationally. I hadn't picked anyone up. I hadn't stopped in hours. There was no one else on this stretch of highway. The tapping started again, 3 slow beats, and this time it aligned perfectly with my turn signal blinking. I hadn't noticed, but I had left the right signal on after checking for a turn onto a rest stop, and each tap coincided with the flash of the light. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to focus on the road ahead. The flat land stretched out in every direction, unbroken by anything substantial, just dark fields and the faint glow of the moon behind thin clouds. My headlights cut through the darkness, but there was nothing to explain what I was seeing. I slowed the car a little more, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes kept flicking to the window, to the handprints, which now seemed more defined. I could see the smudges where fingertips had pressed and dragged slightly, tracing shapes I couldn't identify, movements that didn't make sense. The rhythm of the tapping never changed, perfectly in sync with the turn signal. I tried reasoning with myself, telling myself it was condensation settling strangely, maybe wind against the glass. But the taps continued, steady like a metronome. I considered stopping, but there was nowhere to pull over safely. The shoulders were narrow, the fields stretched endlessly, and the darkness seemed thick. I focused on the road, my hands gripping the wheel, feeling the vibrations of the car under me. My heart felt like it was trying to catch up with the rhythm of those taps, each one leaving a lingering sense of intrusion. I noticed that the air smelled faintly of dust and warm asphalt, the kind of smell that only comes from empty roads in the middle of the night. My ears were tuned to the small noises, the hum of the tires, the air conditioner, the faint whistle of wind through the slightly open windows, and everything else seemed amplified in contrast. Minutes passed. I kept driving, glancing at the passenger window, expecting the handprints to vanish, expecting the taps to stop. They didn't. My mind raced, imagining explanations, running through scenarios, all of them improbable. Eventually, I caught a glimpse of movement outside, low and fast, like something brushing against the car, but there was nothing there when I looked again. The highway remained straight and empty, but the feeling of presence lingered. I tightened my grip on the wheel, focused on the white line fading into the distance, and tried to keep my breathing steady. It wasn't until a small roadside rest stop appeared that I dared to pull over. I eased the car onto the gravel, heart pounding, headlights sweeping the empty lot. I got out cautiously, circling the vehicle, checking around. Nothing. No signs of anyone, no footprints, nothing unusual except the faint dust on the car and the wide open night sky stretching over the plains. I leaned against the hood for a moment, letting my pulse slow, my chest heaving, feeling the night wind on my face. When I finally slid back into the car, I rolled up the passenger window completely and took a moment before starting the engine. The handprints hadn't disappeared, but they had faded enough that they no longer seemed threatening, just smudges in the condensation. I started driving again, slower this time, listening to the hum of the tires, focusing on the empty road ahead. Every once in a while, I glanced at the passenger side, half expecting to see the handprints reappear, but the taps never came back. By the time I reached the next town, just as the first faint light of dawn began to touch the horizon, the tension in my chest had eased. I parked, stepped out, and looked back at the highway I had traveled. It was still flat, still endless, and perfectly quiet. The experience stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind, a strange reminder of how alone you can feel on a straight, empty road, how your own senses can turn the ordinary into something unsettling, and how sometimes the simplest things, a window, condensation, a rhythm, can feel like someone is right there with you when you know they can't be. We finished the pour after midnight, smoothing the last section under work lights that made the wet concrete look black and deep. My shoulders burned from holding the screed. My hands shook from caffeine and cold. March in rural Pennsylvania still held winter in the ground, and the quarry sat lower than the road, a bowl of dark water and stone that swallowed sound. When we packed up, the night felt heavier than usual, like the air had weight. I drove the company truck. My coworker sat beside me, helmet on his lap, head tipped forward. The cab smelled of dust, diesel, and damp gloves. The access road out of the quarry cut through woods with no houses, no barns, no signs. The trees stood close to the pavement, thin trunks and bare branches that caught the headlights and flashed past like ribs. The road surface changed every few hundred yards, from old asphalt to patched gravel and back again. I kept the speed steady and watched for deer. I remember the clock on the dash reading 2:20. The radio stayed off. The engine noise filled the cab, steady and low. I felt the pull of sleep in my eyes and pushed it away by sitting straighter and rolling the window down an inch. Cold air came in, sharp and clean, smelling of leaves and stone. Halfway through the drive, my coworker stirred. He shifted in the seat and asked why I had slowed down. I checked the speed without thinking. The needle had not moved. My foot held the same pressure on the pedal. I told myself he was waking into a half-dream and ignored it. Then I heard it. At first it sounded like loose gravel popping under the tires, but it stayed too even. The rhythm matched the truck. It came from the left side, just outside the headlight spill. Not behind us. Not ahead. Even with my door. The sound had weight to it, a steady thud that rode along with the engine noise instead of falling away. I glanced left. The ditch fell off sharp there, a narrow shoulder, and then darkness. The headlights lit the right side better than the left. The trees swallowed the beam before it reached the ground. I saw nothing moving. I told myself it was the road's surface and kept driving. The sound stayed. When I eased the truck faster, it rose with me. When I eased off, it stayed level. The thud stayed locked to the cab like it knew where my door was. My coworker tensed. He did not turn his head. His breathing changed. He pressed back into the seat and kept his eyes forward. He made a small sound, low and steady, like he was trying to keep himself anchored. He did not want me to stop. I focused on the lane lines. My palms sweated inside my gloves. The cold air from the window no longer helped. I tested the brake, just a touch. The thud matched the change without lag. I tested the gas. Same result. The sound did not rush or fade. It stayed exact. I searched for explanations that fit the world I knew. A deer would fall back or surge ahead. A person could not keep pace at that speed on uneven ground. A loose strap would slap in bursts, not in a measured rhythm. A flat tire would change the feel of the wheel. Nothing felt wrong in my hands. The truck tracked straight. The woods closed in tighter. The road dipped and rose. Shadows slid across the hood. The sound kept time. My co-worker stayed rigid, refusing to look, his focus fixed on the strip of pavement ahead. The cab felt small, like the space between us had shrunk. I remembered the quarry rules about night patrols and trespassers. The site had a service path that ran parallel to the access road for a stretch, used by security trucks during the day. It sat lower than the road in places, hidden by brush. I had driven it once months earlier. The thought did not calm me. The sound still felt wrong for a vehicle. I slowed again as the road bent left. The thud bent with us, still aligned. The trees thinned for a moment, and moonlight broke through. The left shoulder opened just enough to show pale stone and scrub. In that brief wash of light, something moved. It was not a shape from a story. It was a person. He ran on the narrow strip between brush and ditch, keeping pace with the truck. He wore dark work clothes and a hood pulled tight. No reflective tape. No light. His arms pumped low and close. His stride stayed even, trained, efficient. His head stayed turned toward the road, not the truck. He ran like someone used to matching a vehicle on uneven ground. The thud made sense then. It was his feet on packed stone, a sound carried by the cold air and pinned to the cab by speed. I felt a surge of anger cut through the fear. This was dangerous. One slip, and he would go under the wheels. I eased off the gas more, trying to create space. He matched again, close enough that the sound filled the cab. My co-worker pressed his lips together and stared harder at the road. The bend straightened. The moonlight fell away. The runner dropped back, then surged, then dropped again as the shoulder narrowed. The sound wavered for the first time. Brush scraped. A branch snapped. The thud fell behind us and faded. I did not slow. I did not speed. I held the lane until the woods opened into the first sign of town, a lonely reflective marker that caught the headlights and flashed white. The access road met a wider county road. Lights appeared ahead, far and faint. The sound did not return. My co-worker exhaled long and deep. His shoulders lowered. He still did not look back. We drove the rest of the way in silence. At the yard, we parked under the sodium lamps. The night felt ordinary again. The smell of concrete dust came back. My hands stopped shaking. We checked the truck. No loose parts. No damage. No signs of impact. The tires looked fine. The explanation came later, clean and plain. The quarry had hired a night watchman after thefts the previous winter. He ran to stay awake and warm, using the service path that paralleled the access road. He wore dark clothes to avoid spooking drivers and animals. He had learned to match speed to check plates without stopping vehicles. He had a radio, but the batteries died often in the cold. He had been warned not to approach moving trucks, but did it anyway, trusting his legs and the ground he knew. A week after that night, I saw him at the gate at dawn, stretching with the same tight economy I had seen in the moonlight. He nodded once, neutral, like the night meant nothing. The sound had not been something following us from the dark. It had been a person doing a job in a place built to swallow light and sound. I still drive that road with the radio off. I still keep the window cracked. When the woods press close and the shoulder falls away, I listen for the rhythm of feet and remember how easy it is for something ordinary to feel wrong at 2:20 in the morning.